Well, Child Movie Show, live from South Shore Radio. Child Movie Show, Child Movie Show comes out every single Saturday afternoon from 2 o'clock p.m. to 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Joshua Radio is a special edition of the Rashad Movie Show from 8 o'clock p.m. to 10 o'clock p.m. That's the usual time that I come on every Saturday afternoon from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. I have a special guest. His name is John Hanna. He's a Pro Football Hall of Famer. 1991, he was the first New England Patriot to be inducted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He went to the University of Alabama, played under Coach Bear Bryant from 1970 1972, All-American twice. Big time player, great player in college, great player in the pros. He was in the College Football Hall of Fame, inducted in 1999. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1991. He played for New England Patriots most of his career from 1973 to 1985. Pro Football Hall of Famer extraordinaire, man. On the cover of Sports Illustrated in 1981 on August 3rd as the greatest offensive lineman ever. That's how great this gentleman was. He joins me live via Zoom. Welcome to the Rashad Show, Mr. John Hanna.
Hey, I'm here.
All right. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, hello.
Yeah.
This technology's not working tonight.
Yeah. We're gonna keep doing the interview. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for me. I appreciate it.
All right. First question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you well. I can hear you good. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. First question. Where were you born? Where you originally from?
I was born in the hospital was in Canton, Georgia, but I was actually living in a little community called Ball Ground, Georgia, up in North Georgia, up near the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Okay. Other than football, were there other sports that you played while you were in high school other than football? Was football your main sport that you wanted to play?
Yeah, I as a youngster, I played baseball, and the only where I grew up, there was only three sports: it's football, basketball, and baseball. I tried a little bit of basketball, but they gave me 2 points when I hit the backboard. I was that bad, so I decided to stick with baseball and football. But then when I got into high school, I started wrestling. So I played football, I wrestled, and I threw the shot put and discus.
Okay. Other than Alabama, were there other schools that you wanted to attend? Were there other scholarships that you getting during that time when you went to Alabama? Outside of Alabama, were there other schools that reached out to you for a scholarship?
Well, there was a couple that I was really serious in. When during World War II, my mom was teaching at the University of Georgia, and matter of fact, my dad met her there when he was in OCS school, and so Georgia was very interesting to me, and because they had a great offensive line coach there at that time, and I thought that might be a good pick. And then my uncle Bill was coaching at Cal State Fullerton, and University of Southern Cal kind of came to me a little bit through him, and I thought maybe about going out to Southern Cal and living with my uncle Bill while I attended, University of Southern California.
Okay. Talk about the first time you met Coach Bear Bryant, legendary, coach, in 1970. Talk about that first encounter with the great Bear Bryant.
Well, actually, the first time I ever met him was like in 1958. My Uncle Bill was at the University of Alabama playing ball when Coach Bryant came back to the university to coach. So I got to meet him when Uncle Bill was actually playing there. So I got to see him then and got to meet him. In fact, when I was in the fourth grade, I wrote a letter to Coach Bryant and said I'd like to have a football. So he sent me an old practice ball and signed it. And I don't have it now, but boy, I wish I did. But he sent me a football. So uh, that was the first time I ever really got to know him a little bit. But then the next time I really got to meet him was, we went down for a recruitment trip my senior year in high school, and got to shake his hand and talk to him a little bit then, my senior year in high school.
Okay, so I want to know, fast forward to like 1970, that's your freshman year. So the game I want to talk about was the 1970 matchup between USC and Alabama. That was a watershed moment for the South for its integration. You lose that game 42 to 21. Sam Van Cunningham has a big game. He'll be on to be your teammate for the Patriots, but just talk about being part of that game, that watershed moment, because really changed Bear Bryant's perspective to like integrate black players, but just talk about being part of that game in 1970.
Well, you know, it's it looks you think a lot more of it in hindsight than you did at the time. At the time, I just thought, man, we got our butts whipped, and that was all that we really kind of thought about. But when I go back and look at it, that was the first year that they'd gone to from a 10-man or a 10-game schedule to an 11-game schedule. The team that we had was basically comprised of juniors and sophomores. All the seniors had a lot of them graduated. So, it was kind of funny that all of a sudden Coach Bryant would schedule a game on the opener against Southern Cal, which was loaded that year. They had Toby Smith, uh, John Vella, and I mean, they just had great athletes all over the place. But I do know this. It was I've always, I guess, when I look back on it in hindsight and really considered it, opened up um, people's minds a lot. I know everybody, uh, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, but Martin Luther King did a lot, but Sam Cunningham made people want integration. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah,
You
yes,
know,
yes,
yeah,
yes, sir.
it was kind of forced under Johnson and Martin Luther King, but all of a sudden Sam came down there, and now people wanted it. So it changed the difference in attitude about the whole thing, and they saw what a class act he was, as well as the other black athletes on that team, and it just opened up a lot of people's minds and said, "Hey, we need to get, we need to get that. We need to get some more black athletes here. If we're really going to be a team, we need to have black athletes."
Okay, that first season, your first year, that really struggled more
Oh
than
yeah.
usual. You lose 5 games, go 6-5-1. Let's talk about that freshman year. Did you play during that freshman year?
No, I was we weren't allowed to play as freshmen when I went to Alabama. That '70 season was my sophomore year, uh, and it was a struggle year. It was really hard. But like I said, we were all underclassmen. Uh, we were just young and inexperienced, and we had to relearn a lot of stuff. And I think um, at the end of that year, Coach Bryant saw what he had as far as talent, and he changed from that kind of kind of a single wing Houston Veer kind of a drop back game to the wishbone, and the wishbone fit our team like a glove, and our junior year proved that. We had a great running back in Johnny Musso, and Wilbur Jackson came along and played at San Francisco, and um, we just and Joe LeBou, Ellis Beck. I mean, there are just a lot of great running backs, and then our offensive line were uh, more powerful than they were agile. If that so coming off the ball and hitting people and driving them off the ball was more compatible with the talent we had on the offensive line.
Okay, so fast forward to the next season, 71 season, you have a better year. You go 11-1, 7-0 in the SEC. You're the champions of the SEC, but you lose to Nebraska, a team that will go on and win like 2 championships in a row, 71-72. You lose to them 38-6. Talk about that season, losing to Nebraska, how great that team was with Johnny Rodgers, guys like that.
Well, it was a great team. There's no question about it. And you know, if you remember that game, most people don't remember it, but they went down and you know we hit, Coach Bryant moved me instead of playing guard, which was my usual position. He moved me out to tackle to play in front of Jacoby, and then he moved Buddy Brown into guard, and then and he made a few changes like that. So, but in essence, we got the ball one time, and within 3 series, Nebraska was ahead of us 21-0. They drove down and scored. We got the ball and punted to them, and they returned it for a touchdown, and then they drove it down again for a touchdown, and it was 21-0. And Wishbone is not a team, not an offense that you can come from behind that much. And so it really, once they got ahead of us by those 3 touchdowns, there, you know, it just a struggle, and it was a rough night.
Yeah, to apologize again to the listening audience, Nebraska, that was their second consecutive championship. They won it in 1970. According to research, they won in 71 and 70, so they won back-to-back championships. Just wanted to make that correction. Going to the research, look at they won 2 titles in a row in 71 and 70. Okay, so the 71 season, obviously there's a lot of history made. John Mitchell was the first to actually play. Was the black players that were playing, for University of Alabama. Let's talk about just the interactions with the black athletes at that time yourself. Being around, somebody that's a different color of skin at that time in 71.
Nobody thought anything about it. Among the players, I mean, we didn't even. He was just John Mitchell, and at that time I was married, and we'd have people over, and John would come over. We barbecued and stuff like that. And we were all friends, and John was a good person. He was a class act. Uh, you know, he made it easy to like him. And he was very popular. Matter of fact, we elected him captain of our team our senior year. But Wilbur was there too, and was contributing. And then the next year after Wilbur came, you got Ralph Stokes and Mike Washington and a few others. And then, it took off from there.
Okay, so let's look at the final season, the 71 team. 1972. That's the last year, 72, before you go to the NFL. You go 10-2, but you're losing the Cotton Bowl to Texas. Talk about that year, losing to Texas in the Cotton Bowl Classic.
We were 10-1, and then lost to Texas. Yeah. We lost to Auburn. To be honest with you, I hate to say what I want to say because it feels like I'm making an excuse, but it's true. Coach Bryant he didn't like offense a lot. He believed in defense. And so when you would get up and get ahead of a team by maybe 14 points or something like that, he'd kind of sit on the ball and not take any chances. And so we got ahead of them like 17-3 or 16-3 is what I think we were ahead of. And then all the last 2 series, we just they had like 10 guys on the line of scrimmage, and we ran three state dive plays, which you can't make any yards when there's 10 guys up on the line. Well, and then we'd punt. Well, every time we punted, those last two punts, they blocked it and ran it in for a touchdown. And so, we lost it with special teams, but in actuality, we beat their pants off, but they outscored us. So that was just part of it. And then Texas, we went down there and played them, and it was a nip and tuck game. And at the last 2 minutes, the quarterback for Texas kept the ball and ran around, I believe, right end. And the Alabama folks seem to remember him stepping out of bounds at the 4 or 5 yard line, but the Texas officials didn't see it that way, and they gave him a touchdown, and so they beat us in the Cotton Bowl.
All right, so now you go to the NFL, you become the 4th overall pick in 1973 NFL draft. Almost 50 years. Next year will be 50 years of the 73 draft. Let's talk about that draft. Getting ready for that draft. Were you surprised, or would you expect it to be the top 4 pick? Talk about that experience.
I was surprised. I didn't think offensive linemen would go that high. I thought I'd go in the first 3 rounds. I didn't think that. But I didn't think I'd be the 4th overall. And not only did I not think of it, but a lot of people made fun of Coach Bryant or Coach Fairbanks because he drafted me so high. A lot of people basically said I was too short to play in the pros, and because I was just barely 6'3", and but what most people didn't realize is I've got a 37-inch sleeve length, which means I'm one of the few guys that can scratch his ankle without bending over. So my height, being a little less tall, allowed me to get in under people for leverage on the run game. But my long arms helped me on pass protection, so people couldn't grab me before I could get my hands in on their chest. So he saw something that most of us maybe didn't see or whatever, but I was happy about it, and I really appreciated Coach Fairbanks' confidence in me, and I hope he was satisfied that he wasted that number 4 pick on me.
We'll talk about Chuck Fairbanks. What kind of man he was, what kind of coach he was while you was there. Talk about your first interaction with Chuck Fairbanks.
Well, I'll tell you a story, and then I'll get into some of what I thought were his best qualities. Let me turn this on. When I was drafted, when I first went up to camp and all, he called in every guy, and he basically asked him a question. And he says, John, what have you got in your mind for your goals as a football player in the NFL? And I said, well, I want to be a Super Bowl champion and this, that, and the other. He says, well, John, we all want that, but what do you want for yourself? And I said, well, Coach Fairbanks, I said, I've always wanted to kind of be the best guy that ever played this position. And he says, okay, what do you need to do that? And I thought about it for a little while, and I said, well, probably the biggest thing is a coach that can teach me techniques, that'll study me and show me my mistakes, and and just teach me how to be a better ball player. He says, okay. He said, well, what do you think of your offensive line coach now? Well, I had Red Miller, and Red Miller had coached with the St. Louis Cardinals a year before, and he had sent 4 of his 5 guys to the Pro Bowl that year. So he was a great coach, a great offensive line coach. And I said, Coach, I got no problems. I said, Red's the greatest coach I've ever had. So a few years went back, and Red went to the Denver Broncos as the head coach, and Fairbanks hired another offensive line coach for a year, and he wasn't a real good coach, and he had a problem with alcohol, a few things like that, and so at the end of the year, I went into Coach Fairbanks' office, and I looked at him and I said, Coach, remember that conversation we had my rookie year about what I needed to achieve my goals? He says, I sure do. He says, what do you need to talk to me about? I said, Coach, we need an offensive line coach bad. And he said, okay. And that was all he said. Next year, I come back, and Jim Ringo, he got him from Buffalo, came to us. Jim Ringo took my game and just it was what he taught me and showed me, and the mental aspects of the game and how to approach the game, all those different things were just more than I could expect. Jim Ringo had to be the greatest offensive line coach that ever was, and I tell you, he was great. But anyway, that's my story about Fairbanks, and kind of gives you a little indication about Coach Fairbanks. Never yelled, he never cussed. If he called you, here were his two things. He said, if he called you a jackass, you're a jackass, just like that. That meant you're in real trouble. You didn't do very good. But if he ever called you a double jackass, you might as well bring your playbook because you're gone. And that's the way he was. And he was a very humble man. He did not have an ego to the point where he hired coaches who may have known more about the game than he did. He was, and he didn't mind surrounding himself with experts, which a lot of coaches have problems with. They've got to feel like they're in charge of everything and over everything, where he kind of fit in as one of them. He was the leader. He made the final decisions, but he listened. And he had a great eye for talent, not only coaching talent, like I talked about with Jim Ringo, but he had a great eye for player talent as well. And Coach Fairbanks, in my mind, was the best head coach I ever had in my life.
Okay, so that draft, you got Sam Cunningham, yourself, Ray Hamilton, Darryl Stingley. You had future head coaches that were assistant coach on the offense, Brian Earhart, mentioned Red Miller, and Sam Utiliano. I'm saying his name right. Utiliano. I think I'm saying his name right. But you go 5-9. Go 5-9 during that season. Finishing third place. This is the time where 14. That many games wasn't played. Like 16 games, only 14 games played during that season. So let's describe that first season. Going 5-9, playing on a losing team because you wasn't used to that when you was in college. Let's talk about adjusting to like losing, in the first year.
The game's different today. You can't compare then and now. Now you can come in and you can play your first year because you got talent. Back then you had to learn the game, and it took you about 3 years before you learned it. The first year you might surprise a few people because of your talent, and they hadn't seen you on film before. Your second year was your worst year. The reason why is everybody saw the film, and then they knew what they could do to beat you. Then all of a sudden, the third year you became a pro, and you realize how you have to change up your game and what you have to do to counteract what they're doing to you. So you have to learn, and that's when a lot of people who go into the NFL and rely on talent, they won't make it past their second or third year. But people who learn the game, who commit themselves to studying their position and learning technique and learning the game itself, they'll last forever because they take talent and then knowledge, they add knowledge to it. And those are the great players.
Okay, let's fast forward to 1976. That's when things really took off for your team. You go 11-3, but you lose, in the divisional playoffs to the Raiders. That was a very talented team. You had, yourself was an All-Pro, Pro Bowler, Leon Gray, Russ Francis, who played with the 49ers, and won a Super Bowl with the 84 49ers. Mike Haynes, obviously before he became a Raider, he was a Patriots team. What took off? What really turned everything around? Because you didn't have wasn't playing that good the first 3 seasons. But what turned around in '76 where things just really took off? Talk about that experience.
Well, I think it's been so long ago, it's kind of hard to remember exactly what happened. But I do know um, that was the year that they moved Leon. What had happened is I was playing left guard um, with Big Bob, who had been playing with St. Louis, and he was tutoring me. And then Leon was playing right tackle next to Lenny St. Jean, and Lenny was tutoring Leon to be an NFL tackle. Well, all of a sudden now they shifted me and Leon together over to the left hand side. And um, we had Bam, we had Andy Johnson in the backfield, and Steve Grogan. I think Steve Grogan was a big part of it. So on our offense, we had a really um, strong weak side running attack, and Leon was just as great a pass blocker as he was a run blocker. So we had that on offense, and then we had and Bam. I mean, when we did run right, you had Bam most of the time leading it up, and nobody's ever seen a fullback hit a guy in the mouth as hard as Bam would. I mean, he'd bang him. But anyway, we also we had the receivers with Daryl, and we had some great receivers. But on defense, I think adding Mike Strange, or not Mike Strange, Mike Haynes at corner, and Tim Fox as a safety, free safety, um, really strengthened our defense dramatically, and especially for the against the passing attack. We'd had good offensive linemen, like you had mentioned before. We had Sugar Bear, had Tony McGee. Uh, let's see who else was over there. Mel Lunsford, uh, and then we had Steve Nelson, who was coming in. That would have been his second year. We had, let's see, so we we had all those guys into play, and we had we had improvement in personnel, and I think the improvement in personnel also improved our attitude. Uh, we got, I think, I just remembered one thing. We got Jess Phillips, and I think this was one of the big things in a preseason game. Uh, we traded. We got Jess Phillips, who was a running back, and he primarily played special teams for us. But Jess was a character, and Jess was on the kickoff return team, and so anyway, he's blocking this guy, and he blocks him, and he blocks him, and he blocks the guy out behind our sideline, and the guy's running. You know how everybody stands on the sideline. Well, he's running behind where everybody's lined up, and then all of a sudden he comes back out on the field, and Jess knocks him on his butt again. Well, the team starts laughing. Well, Jess stands up and he says, "Turn off the projector." And so the coach did. And he says, "I don't know what you're laughing at." He said, "If I'd have been with the Raiders, that guy'd have never been out on the field, and I could have blocked somebody else." And all of a sudden, everybody said, "Wait a second. Maybe our attitudes need to change. Maybe we need to get a little bit more like that." And I think that was a big turning point in our team, was when Jess stood up and kind of called us out on that.
Okay, so yeah, Chuck Fairbanks won Coach of the Year. Mike Haynes won Rookie of the Year. He ran for 2,957 yards, averaging 5 yards per carry. He was second best in the league with 376 points. And the 2,957 yards rushing were the fifth highest total in NFL history at the time. The team's 5.0 yards per carry was the best in the NFL. Remains higher than all Super Bowl champions except the 1973 Miami Dolphins. So your offense was always predicated on running the ball. Although you led the league in takeaways with 50, you were still in the league in turnover differential at plus 14. So let's get to the Oakland Raiders game. That's a very controversial game. The Ray Hamilton, controversial roughing the passer. That was a great Raiders team. They was on a mission. They had fallen short due to the Steelers and stuff like that, having tough times getting over that hump. But you had them on the road. You had a chance to beat them. Talk about that
Well,
tough the Raiders.
here's the real call that hurt us. No, and nobody remembers this, and nobody even noticed it. But we ran slant 19. It was like 3rd and 2. We ran slant 19, and which was a fullback over the left side, over the left tackle, and Bam ran, and the yard marker, he went right past the yard marker and then stepped out of bounds. But the yard marker hadn't been pulled tight. So he was actually a half a yard short, so we had to punt it away, which was kind of interesting. That was had we had that yard marker been stretched, Sam would have gotten the yard, and we'd have never had to have that pass rushing call. We'd have beat him outright because we'd eaten the clock up. But that was the real thing that happened that most people never realized. But whoever was stretching the chains didn't stretch them out the way he was supposed to.
They caught a break on that also as well, and they went on to win the Super Bowl, beat the Vikings. So 77 rolls around the next year, but you go 9-5, you didn't qualify for the playoffs. What went wrong compared to the year before in '77?
Well, I guess I've got to take some blame on that. Leon and I went to the Pro Bowl for the first time in '76, and when we got out there, Gene Upshaw came with the idea of at that time in a contract, you signed a contract said you couldn't tell other players what you made. So he came up with the idea is that we would all write what we made on a piece of paper, and nobody would know who's making what. So they started pulling out and reading off the amounts, and 110, 105, 106, 95, 98. And then all of a sudden out came 30 and 27.5. Well, I get back to the hotel room in San Diego, and I get a phone call from Leon. Leon says, "Which one were you?" I said, "I was 30. I said, "Which one were you?" He said, "I was 27.5. I said, "What are we going to do?" He said, "Well, Howard Slusher is here, and I think he's Sam's attorney, and I think we need to talk to him." I said, "Okay, let's go talk to him." So, in essence, we went to camp and we practiced. We played in all the preseason games, but except for the last one, we told them we were going to walk if they didn't give us a fair contract. So we walked, and that night we got a call from Fairbanks. He says, "I think we got a deal worked out. So can y'all come over to the house?" This was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, "Sure." So Leon and I show up, and Howard talked to us. Said, "John, it's not the greatest deal in the world, but it's a deal we can live with, and I think y'all need to sign it." I said, "Okay, Howard, we'll do it." And then all of a sudden we heard in the living room Chuck Sullivan uh, talking to his dad. And he says, "Oh, Dad, they're going to break us. They're going to break us." And so they refused to offer us the contract even after we got there. So Leon and I walked, and they lost 3 games while we were out. So that was mine and Leon's fault.
Yeah, so 78 goes around. This time you go to the playoffs. 11-5, you win the division, but you lose to the Oilers, 31-14. Talk about that loss against. That's when they had Earl Campbell on the Oilers, correct? Earl Campbell. Let's
Right.
talk about that loss.
Well, we 78. I'm trying to remember what happened. They just outplayed us. I think is all it was. They beat us. I mean, that was.
Yeah,
What can you say? I mean, they just outplayed us. We made a lot of mistakes. Didn't do the things we needed to do to win, and they beat us. They just had the better team that day. That's all you can say.
yeah, yeah. You had a great season, especially when it comes to at the time you had the then NFL record for most rushing yards in a single season, rushing for 3,165 yards on the ground. That would be broken later by the Baltimore Ravens, led by Lamar Jackson. Sam Cunningham
Yeah,
had 768 yards.
there's a difference though. There's a difference.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. The
Look at
running back.
look at the look. They had one back that got most of that yardage.
Yeah.
We had five backs that had over 500 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that that's a huge difference,
Yeah.
and it shows what the offensive line did. We opened holes, and
Yeah.
we had a great offensive line. We had Shelby Jordan, Sam Adams, Bill and Titus, myself, and Leon, and then had a couple of good other guys with Bob McKay and Pete Brock, and I mean we just had a great offensive line unit, and we opened those holes, and the backs ran and blocked. And it was a very unselfish offense on the running game, very unselfish.
Yeah. Even Steve Grogan had 539 yards rushing. Boys Ivory, Andy Johnson, Sam Cunningham. So four players rushed for more than 500 yards. So yes, you're correct. It was different from what Baltimore did. Yeah, you definitely right on the money on that. Wait, 79 didn't make it to the playoffs. 97. I want to fast forward to 1981 because 81 before you started, he was featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated as the best offensive lineman of all time. Talk about how did he get involved with Sports Illustrated and be on the cover August 3rd, 1981. Talk about that experience being on the cover of Sports Illustrated because compared to today, Sports Illustrated back then was a big publication compared to what it is today. Let's talk about that experience being on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
I think it did two things. Some of the people read it and believed it, so you had an advantage. And then other people read it and they put a target on you, and they wanted to beat you because if they could beat you, then they've established themselves. So it was both a curse and a blessing. The hardest part was wanted to make sure my team knew that I didn't take it real serious. Uh, that I was still a member of the team, and that's all I was. And I wanted to serve the team and basically do my job, protect them, and make them better. And it wasn't. I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about us, and that was hard. Because some of the guys, they get a little. There's human nature. There are a few get a little upset about that, and so that was. But I think. Uh, I think most everybody just kind of took it with a grain of salt and said, "I asked this newspapers, don't worry about it," and which was fine, and that's the way you're supposed to do it. Beauty's always in the eye of the beholder. You might see a girl and think she's beautiful, and I think she's ugly, vice versa. So that's part of it. That's just part of the racket.
Yeah, that 81 season was a bad season. Go 2-14. Ron Earhart, was the coach. What went wrong during that season? It's just a disaster. It was season 2-14. What went wrong during that season of 81?
Talent, basically, you we had a guy that was Rick Steinberg wanted to be the boss of the organization, and he was the player personnel guy, and he just had he didn't draft good players, um, and basically gave Earhart that not that good of a crop of talent to be able to coach. That being said, I think Earhart was at his strongest as an offensive coordinator. You've heard of the Peter principle. When you get promoted beyond your capabilities. But I think Ron Earhart was, he went later on. He coached for the Giants and won the Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator. So he could do. But I think he would have been a better head coach had he given the talent with the Patriot organization. But you're starting to see once all this stuff started happening after Fairbanks left, you started seeing the good players being traded or not signed. They had traded Leon away, remember that? And which destroyed